This is what the TwoTrees Sapphire CoreXY 3D printer kit looks like after you've taken it out of this box that it came in. Now, TwoTrees is a brand that I haven't talked about before. Most of you probably haven't even heard of it yet. And at first glance, the brand seems to be a Chinese company that actually understands what quality means. I might be getting ahead of myself there, but just take a look at it. The hot end comes in its own box. The screen comes in its own box. The main box here has the bed and parts of the frame. The frame comes largely pre-assembled to limit the amount of work that you have to do in putting it all together. And look at this. We have high wind rails, or I guess they're the Chinese version of high wind rails, so linear motion rails for the movement system. So this is really looking promising as far as being just a top-notch CoreXY machine that gets us away from this moving bed paradigm that we've been stuck under in the 3D printing consumer space. So I'm really excited for this build, and I can't wait to see this thing fully assembled. So let's roll that intro, and after that we'll take a look at the printer. All right, the printer is pretty much built, but let's take this moment to talk about the electronics that it comes with. This is a LurgeX control board, and honestly, you guys, this is the best electronics that I've ever seen on a printer coming out of China. The LurgeX is proprietary. It's not open source, so hacking it, customizing it is not an option really, but there's a whole lot of functionality built into it the way that it is. So it's pretty good. It's not as good as like a Duet for sure, but for Chinese stuff, that's it's nice. Now, this right here is the sort of hotbed daughter board. I don't know why they had to make that external to the main Lurge board, but they did. Down here we see this relay board, and that is the power control. So the printer has this on-off switch over here, which is just sort of the brute force way to turn the printer on and off. But the green and yellow wires here go up to this power button, which is like an Apple style push button switch, like momentary switch. So that's a pretty nice little usability feature. And then the white wire here goes to the Lurge board, which means that the Lurge board can auto power down the printer if it's just been sitting idle for too long. So a very nice feature to have, you know, sort of a smart feature. This is the MOSFET solid state relay bed heater control. And basically it's running off of 24 volts. It would be nicer if it was running off of AC current, but you know, that's not a very large bed, so I don't think we're gonna have to wait very long for that bed to get up to temperature. Back up here on the board, we can see the USB plugs in there, and that goes up to the outside of the printer, and we have a USB thumb drive for putting prints onto the printer. That is so cool, you guys. Like, I'm so tired of the fiddly little SD cards, so the thumb drive thing is a total win. Now, there was some little bit of a weirdness with my wiring, and luckily the solution to the first problem yields a solution to the second problem. So first of all, we have this fan here, which is blowing over the stepper motor drivers. Oh, by the way, we have two nice stepper motor drivers for running the X and Y axis, so hopefully they'll be more quiet than usual. And then we have your bottom of the line Polu A4988 stepper motor drivers there for running the extruder and the Z motor. So yeah, an interesting solution, cost-saving solution. But anyway, we have this fan that we need to plug into the board, and there's nowhere to plug board cooling into this board. So I think you would want to splice this into the power supply so that it's always on maybe. But the easy solution that I'm going to do is just to cut that off, and I'll have the plug left over. And then here I have the hot end cooling fan. So this is not the part cooling fan. This is like the main heatsink cooling fan. And I'm going to splice the board cooling fan into the hot end cooling fan so that whenever the hot end cooling fan is on, the board will also be getting cooled. And I'm going to use this connector on these two wires. These are my thermistor wires that go to my bed, and for some reason they didn't come with a plug connected to them. So this other one up here did. These are the thermistor wires to the hot end, and they came with the plug, but I'll just be able to splice these wires onto that plug, and yeah, I didn't even need to go buy anything or do anything fancy. The solution was in the box. It's a little bit funky, so a little quality control issue, nothing tragic, but you know, Brown M&Ms, people. It's all assembled, but I've got a couple of issues. First of all, it's sort of intuitive to assemble the bed in this orientation with this just sort of dropping off like that. But this is upside down because these things back here now will collide with the base before the bed has dropped to the full height. So you actually lose printer height doing it this way. So I need to flip that around. That's problem number one. Problem number two and problem number three are here on the software, on the firmware. I've never interacted with the Lurge interface before, and so I wanted to familiarize myself with it. Now, first of all, you can see that for some reason it's telling me my bed temperature is 263 degrees, which obviously is not true. I solved this problem by loosening the bolt that was pinching and shorting out the thermistor wires. So, I was going through these buttons and I got to this one, just trying to figure it all out, and I understood the menus, and then I pressed this. And sure, why not restore to factory settings? I just received my printer, nothing has been customized about it. I clicked yes. Seems reasonable, right? Well, you know what that did? It completely erased all of the settings specific to this printer. It reset the Lurge board to like a stock for all printers. And so now I've got to come through here and individually reset it all up. Set it to be a CoreXY machine. Go back, set the motors, set the acceleration, set the speed, set the step value, set the direction, set the homing speed, all those values. So I actually did change all of those parameters right there on the printer, and I got it working. But what I wanted to do is get it back to stock so that I'm reviewing the exact printer that you guys will receive if you buy this. And to that end, I reached out to TwoTrees and I got them to send me these two firmware builds, these two config files there. But neither of these work. So I'm hoping that that's not the actual firmware that came with the printer. Instead, what I did is I built my own version of the firmware here. This is the online generator Lurge config. And I just did that here on the online generator. One thing to note, and we'll get more into this here in another video, but this is a total knockoff of the RepRap firmware configurator. So if you just look at the fonts are the same, the coloring's the same, the organization is the same. So makes me think that the Lurge board itself is probably extremely derivative of Duet boards. If they're going to copy the RepRap firmware build, then they'll probably copy the Duet boards as well. Yeah, so once you've done all this, you can just generate the configurator file, and that's what I've done, and installed it on the machine, and it's working like a champ with both mesh bed leveling and filament runout detection. To install it on the machine, you just put the USB drive into the USB slot, then you go over here to Settings, System, and the little arrow is for Upload. Choose your USB drive, and then scroll down to your file. Press OK, and it will install. The inaugural test print is proceeding nicely, and let's take a second to talk about the noise coming off this printer. So the X and Y drives are quite quiet. I'm really liking the level of sound coming off them. It's really reasonable. But the Z motion is not nearly as quiet. Now I put this flag here just to emphasize the movement of that Z stepper motor. I don't know if you guys can see that happening. But basically, it's correcting for the bed being out of level. So that's the mesh bed leveling algorithm doing its thing. And you can hear, I'm going to change the sound over to the camera speaker. You'll be able to hear the click clack of the movement there. Yeah, that's the loudest part of the printer as it's printing, and it would have been nice if they'd have given us the nicer stepper motor drivers like on X and Y, but I guess they gotta save a buck wherever they can. Speaking of mesh bed leveling, let's talk about that. You see this? That is the sensor. And so what you do is you sort of chase the nozzle around as it probes points on the bed, and the nozzle touches there inside of the foam ring, and that activates this little touch sensor, and that's how that's done. So it's not nearly as clean as like a BL Touch, but for like a very cheap amount of money, you get mesh bed leveling, and so this is much better than not having mesh bed leveling at all. However, the Lurge is already set up to use a BL Touch sensor, so that's going to be my very first upgrade for sure. Let's talk about the test print because, you know, the proof is in the pudding, or the proof of the pudding is in the eating, or however that saying goes. Anyway, I used the filament that came in the box with the printer, and it's not the best for showing on camera, but this test print is as good as it gets, you guys. I have not seen a printer that makes better prints as far as the mechanics go. There's zero ghosting or rippling, whatever you want to call it. This was printed at 60 millimeters per second, so I'm sure that I could up that speed. The part cooling is quite good. I might be able to do just a small bit of improvement with the part cooling with better ducts, directing the air more specifically straight onto the nozzle. You can see it gets a little bit rough right here where my finger is at the very top. But also, the part cooling for the bridging is fantastic. You can see just an ever so slight amount of drooping there in the ceiling right up under there where it had to do that bridging. So yeah, all in all, super impressive machine. I'm sure I can print faster than I did with it. So that's a great test print. Speaking of part cooling, let me show you guys what I'm talking about there. The nozzle sits right here, and that's actually towards the back. Like if I'm lining that up, you can see it's towards the back of the ducts here, the open ducts. So about 60 to 75% of the wind is in front of that nozzle, and it's really just a very large general breeze. What you want is a very specific little point of air being directed right where the hot filament comes squirting out of the nozzle. And you know, after that, you don't want to be cooling the bed, you don't want to be cooling the part in general. You just want to get that plastic to be solid as soon as it leaves the nozzle. Now I'm going to take this off so we can get a look at the hot end. Well, there it is, and it's functional. That's the best thing I can say about it. You see that giant block of aluminum there? That's going to retain a lot of heat, which means that your throat with the PTFE lining coming down in there is going to get very warm, which means that your filament is going to get soft before it ever reaches the melt zone up here, which can lead to jamming. So those large chunky cooling fins are not going to do a very good job stripping the heat away, and that tiny little fan is not really up to the task either, and also that's going to be a very loud little fan right there. So all in all, I'd say that this is the worst feature on the printer, and it gets my nomination for the first thing that needs to be upgraded. But it does do the job, so I guess I can't complain too much. It is functional. For printing PLA anyway. Let's talk about the build quality of this printer because it's really good. You see this? That is an aluminum plastic sandwich. So we have aluminum plates top and bottom with some plastic material on the inside there. But almost nothing is plastic on this printer. You have the fans and the Bowden tube, and that's about it. Everything else is metal. Well, also the belt, of course. But yeah, it's all metal. We have linear rails for the motion. We have no like Delrin pulleys. So it's just fantastically designed there for the build quality. And there's only one other printer that I've seen coming out of China which matches the build quality of this printer, and that's my Tevo Little Monster, which is interesting because there's a couple of clues on this printer that make me think it was designed by the same guy who designed the Tevo Little Monster. First of all, we have those two part cooling fans side by side. I haven't seen that on another Chinese printer. Second of all, you can see the design right there on the hot end for the fan airflow. And that's the same design as we see on the Tevo Little Monster. So the final thing is, of course, the knockoff of the E3D Titan extruder. And so those three things make me think that the same engineer, and I was really impressed with the Tevo Little Monster, and I'm equally impressed with the build on this one. I wish that he wasn't knocking off E3D. That's really unnecessary. And of course, the Lurge board and associated firmware are really user-friendly. They have all of the features that you would want out of a 3D printer: filament runout detection, bed leveling, all the little things. You can't send prints wirelessly, and I did go looking to see if you can hook Octoprint to this, and it's probably possible, but there's not a lot of documentation on that. So The major problem that I have with the Lurge board is I believe that the firmware is, it's a copy. I believe they just used RepRap firmware and rewrote it, which means that they have to release the source code for that firmware. And of course they're not doing it. It's completely closed source. They won't let anybody see where that came from. But judging by that, how nicely it plays with the online configurator and the configurator's similarity to the RepRap firmware configurator, yeah, I would be seriously surprised if that's not just RepRap firmware in there that's been, you know, chopped up and simplified for this interface. So turning the machine on and off is actually a very polished feeling thing on this printer. You just press that button, it's got a nice feel to it. It boots up, and then to turn it off, you just click on the screen top up here and then shut down. So we're in the middle of a print, and let me show you guys, this is the filament runout sensor, and for sure it works. And once it runs out of filament, it definitely pauses the printer and waits for you to reload. In fact, it even gives you a dialog box about reloading. The problem with this sensor is that it didn't come with any way to mount it to the extruder here. So no matter what we do, we're gonna have to come up with a mount for this, and probably I'm just gonna switch it. It's just 3 wires, right? So I can just switch that from my optical filament runout extruder mechanism. Okay, let's resume this print. And now I'm just gonna come over here and unplug the machine. Here's the problem though. This time it didn't move, but what can easily happen is that. See, I'm not even touching it now. The bed's just falling, and it's gonna fall all the way to the bottom just based on gravity. We'll just turn this back on, and we'll go here, print, we'll choose the print again. Okay, and it asks us if we want to continue from where we left off, and the answer is yes. But the problem with this is it's going to home in X and Y, but it will not home in Z, which means it's just gonna start printing in the air. So it technically has print resume on power loss, but it's not very effective. See what I mean? It's just printing in the air. The print's way down there. Let's talk about another minor but annoying quality issue. You can see here, step 7 on the instruction manual tells you to fully assemble the frame, and after that's done, you install the Z limit switch collar. So that's what they're showing there. But the one that I received, the collar I received, isn't split like the one they showed in the instructions. So I had to disassemble my frame just to slide this down over the bar, which is, yeah, that's annoying. Let's talk about the print surface that came with the printer. It is a build tack style print surface, and I'm sure it will function adequately. But there are these 3 holes that are punched out of the surface, and those are to allow you to access the screws in the bed. Here's the thing, you don't need to access those screws once you put the build tack on. You just don't. You only need to access them when you're first putting the printer together. So having those holes punched in the surface is annoying to begin with, and then look at, they got it upside down. In order to line up the screw holes with the print surface, it means that you can no longer read the writing because it's upside down. So there's more brown M&Ms for you guys. Yeah, and so for those reasons and other reasons as well, I'm going to be using this flexible magnetic print surface that I got from China for like 20 bucks. I think that'll function nicely for me. And this was actually sized to fit the Ender 3. So if I compare the 2 print surfaces here, you can see just how much smaller the bed is on the Sapphire printer compared to an Ender 3. We lose about 30 millimeters on each, or maybe 20 millimeters on each side. But adding to that is the fact that the hot end kind of collides with things up here, and that makes it so that the nozzle does not reach to the edge of the bed. The nozzle only gets to like 6 millimeters off the bed here. On this side, I believe it's 4 millimeters, so total of 190 in the X direction, and then we're 6 millimeters off the back of the bed here. We can get to the very front edge of the bed, which is nice, but so we're 194 total dimensions in Y and 190 in X. So if you're looking to maximize your print area, this is not the printer for you. And finally, let's talk about this giant plate that came with the printer that's meant to be installed over the bottom. I'm thinking this is another waste of money. They did not need to send this once the printer is sitting on the desk, you're never going to be able to access or accidentally touch any of this wiring anyway. And while there are cutouts here in this plate, it's still going to limit the airflow. So to keep things cooler, you want that open anyway. So there's two things I would like to see just done away with. First being get rid of the geared extruders. Second, get rid of this plate and save us the money. By the numbers, let's look at this thing broken down feature for feature and compare it to all the other printers that I've reviewed. So I have sanitized the values here for the top 4 printers, which means that I went through for a few minutes and made sure that none of these individual scores compared to the other 3 printers didn't make sense. So we're comparing apples to apples here in these numbers, but that's not the case for all these other printers down the list. Some of these printers I reviewed like a year or 2 years ago, and my mind was in a different place, and I probably gave them higher scores than they deserved relative to today's values. So yeah. So let's look at the printer. Here it is. The TwoTrees Sapphire S earns a total score of 72 points, which puts it in second place for overall point totals. So it's got the most features and it's just the highest quality, second place. But the value score is a 20.6, which puts it above the first place. That's a very expensive printer, the Tevo Little Monster at $800. And it's a pretty good value, but not nearly as good as the Ender 3 at that 36 points, which is just, the best value you can get. It's a very inexpensive printer, and it's just a really solid printer for that much money. Speaking of the money, this is a $350 price tag that I've given it to compute that value score, and that is the price that I found the cheapest price here on Banggood. But there's another listing that I found here on Banggood for $468, and it gives you 3 different build options. You can either get it with or without that plate on the bottom that covers up the electronics, for instance. I expect that this closer to $500 price tag is the actual price that they want to sell this printer at, but I don't think that it's selling very well right now. And I think that's mostly just because marketing efforts have been poor and it's not a well-known printer. But the market tends to correct itself, and I think people will figure out about this printer sooner or later, and that price will come up, and you'll probably, I don't know, if you're seeing this video a year and a half, a year from now, you might actually have to pay $500 for this printer. But hopefully it'll stay down here close to $350. We'll see what the laws of supply and demand have to say about that. So yeah, overall, really, really strong showing, from this printer based on this scorecard. And there you have it. That is the TwoTrees Sapphire CoreXY 3D printer, and it's a fantastic machine. Just the best quality, finest working machine I've ever seen coming out of China. Even the Tevo Little Monster, which was obviously done by the same engineer, did not function as well as this one does straight out of the box. So I absolutely recommend that people go out and buy this printer. But it's a tough sell because with a build volume of 200 millimeters cubed, it's pretty much the same size as the Ender 3 here. And the Ender 3 is almost half the price. So when you're getting the same quality of prints out of both of these printers straight out of the box, and it's the same build volume, how can you justify spending twice as much money? And the answer is just, it's in the details. It's all about the details. Every single thing about this printer is better than the Ender 3. From the all-metal construction, the linear rails, the motion system being CoreXY, not having a moving bed so you can print at faster speeds, the touchscreen interface, everything. The ability to do the mesh bed leveling with that sensor, everything is better about this printer. You can certainly upgrade the Ender 3, and you can watch my video series where I've done that. I upgraded an Ender 3 Pro, which is this one, and also just a regular Ender 3, both with duet boards to have all of that functionality, and it's actually a little bit better functionality than this printer when I'm all done, but the price ends up being about the same. So do you want to do that work? It's a fun project, but do you want to do all of the work to get the Ender 3 functioning at this level, or do you just want to buy a kit that works straight out of the box at this level? So most of you probably want that. So I think that you can justify the extra, $150 to buy this printer. And of course, you can always continue to upgrade this printer and you will be at a higher level when it's all said and done with this printer than you could ever achieve with the Ender 3, because there's a whole lot of plastic on the Ender 3 that you're going to be suspicious of it. Will it work in an enclosure? When you're sticking this thing basically in an oven, will that plastic get soft and warp and lead to problems? With the all metal construction, that's not going to be an issue. So I love this printer. I really do. I'm really happy with it. My number one complaint, probably the only bad thing about it, is it's too small for me, right? That 200 millimeters cubed print volume is not enough. Most of the stuff that I do is pretty small, so this will work. But when I need to print bigger stuff, it's pretty much at this size. This is the TwoTrees X5S 400. You can watch the review video for this printer here. But this one, also a CoreXY machine, has serious quality issues. Like you're getting flex in the posts here. The pulleys are plastic, just like you're going to find on the Ender 3. There's all kinds of little issues. All of them are fixable, but we're talking a whole lot of my time to design the kit that will get this thing working at this level, but it will never be truly as good as this printer because it's not all metal. It does not have those linear motion rails. You can't understate how cool and how good those are. Zero lash, zero play, high quality motion rails. It's fantastic. So unfortunately, even the forthcoming E3D tool changing printer is not as large as the TwoTrees X5S 400. And they even make a bigger one, the X5S 500. Crazy. And as good as that printer is going to be, and it's going to blow all these printers out of the water as far as quality goes, but we've been waiting at least a year for it, and looks like we still have a longer wait to come. So if you want a CoreXY machine now, these are probably the two machines that you're going to be choosing from. There's a lot of DIY machines out there as well, but yeah, as far as kits go, these are the ones to get. But even once that E3D machine arrives, it's still, you're not going to have that functionality that we want, the larger print volume. So I want this quality at this size, and I can't get that. I just can't buy it yet. So give it a few years maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I made this video strictly because of these wonderful folks. These guys support this channel monetarily, and I would not be making videos if it wasn't for their help. That's the truth. So please give them a thank you in the comments down below, or join their ranks. Currently, Patreon is still the only place where you can support me. I'm still working on finding a replacement for Patreon because we all know what Patreon did wrong. But until then, Patreon is it. And yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.